Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Eileen Belton, and I'm with Missouri Assistive Technology. And we're bringing to you a series of talks this year. It's called Let's Talk ICT. ICT is the new term for what used to be called web accessibility or accessible documents. And so it is our goal to offer these short talks and demonstrations on areas that would be helpful for you making accessible websites and documents. We also want to make sure that they can be timely as well. And so we start today with a very timely topic, and that is making online classroom materials accessible for students. We felt the best place to start with this series would be to reach out to a school district that had an experience with this, that could share their journey of the process, the pitfalls, and then the successes that they had in successfully transitioning students that had visual impairments into using accessible documents online in an online classroom. And so we reached out to Francis Howell School District, and that leads us to our guest presenter today is Laura Gierer. She is a special ed teacher for the past 15 years. Her specialty or area of specialty is teaching the visually impaired students. And she's also, we were talking earlier, she's a mom of two, and she's passionate about gardening in the outdoors. And today is one of the last few days of your summer, Laura.
It is.
Yeah, and what a beautiful day to be able to get outdoors and do the gardening you love. So I appreciate you taking the time today to share with us the process. And so I'd like to welcome you. I'd also like to let everybody else know that right now we have you on mute. But we will have time for question and answers. And I think, Laura, what we'll do, since the captioner is placing the captions in the chat box, is that I will unmute everybody at the end, and we'll allow people to ask questions, if that's all right with you.
Yep, that's fine.
Wonderful. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to welcome Laura Gierer.
Good morning. I am going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see my screen now. Someone will have to say something if you can't, because I don't have you guys in pictures anymore. But briefly, my role at Francis Howell is I'm a teacher of the visually impaired. I provide instruction in Braille, technology, and then what is called the expanded core curriculum, which includes just some specific things for students with vision impairments, like adaptive daily living skills, career education, technology, compensatory skills. Just there's 9 different areas that we provide instruction in. I also provide consultation and training for the teachers within the district that work with students with vision impairments. So your regular ed teachers, your specials teachers, and then we also are responsible for providing the accessible materials for our students, whether that's hard copy Braille or electronic, the books in Braille, those sorts of things. We currently, we have a very large population of students with vision impairments in our district. I think we're numbering between like 42 and 45. I'd have to look at the actual number. And then we have 4 staff that provide that vision instruction and also orientation and mobility instruction in our district. So we have quite a few within our district right now. So what changed in March 2020 when it came to providing access to student assignments? Well, obviously, we had to completely switch to remote learning. Thankfully, we were actually given notice on that very, it was our last day before spring break. We were set to go on spring break the next day, and our supervisor very caringly told us that this was probably going to happen. We were probably going to shut down. So we were able to, we had about a day to load up some of our students' backpacks with their technology and their materials, so that they would have everything that, hopefully everything that they needed. You know, normally they don't take home all of their technology, but with knowing that this shutdown was probably going to happen, we loaded up, they have book ports, which are small devices that can play audio off an SD card. We loaded those up with some, webinars. We sent those home. We sent home their braillers, their iPads, all of that. And then we also loaded up our cars with embossers to produce Braille, and Braille paper to produce materials. And then when it became official later on in spring break that we were shutting down, we actually ended up having to do drop-offs. So we were allowed to go to the school and get some of our Braille books for our students, and we would drop them on their porch. Or if there was something that they realized they needed that they didn't have, we were able to do that, at least until the state officially completely shut down, and then we were no longer able to do those drop-offs. So were we already set up for accessible remote learning? Sort of. Our upper elementary and our middle school learners were very familiar with Google Classroom and Google Docs, Google Drive. Most of them could navigate a computer using JAWS, which is screen reading software that's specifically used with people who have vision impairments. They had not, though, used Zoom or Google Meet. So those were new technology that we had to walk them through. So were we completely set up? Obviously, no. I don't know that anybody really was, but thankfully our students did have some of that foundation to switch to the remote learning. And so how did we approach this change? Google Classroom is very different when it's being used for just one subject. So for example, like in high school, you may have a Google Classroom just for your science class. And so you navigate through just that Google Classroom for science. You can get your science materials, do your assignments, all of that. It's really different when you suddenly have it for all of your subjects on one Google Classroom, which is what happened with our upper elementary students. So if you imagine being in 5th grade, and our 5th graders do like a team teaching model. So 2 classes swap, and they all have the one teacher for ELA and the other teacher for math and content, social studies and science. And so suddenly they're trying to access things through Google Classroom, and there's literally hundreds of posts on the Google Classroom page because the students, all the other students in their class, which was, there was about 50 total between the 2 classes, are posting on Google Classroom. Their assignments are on Google Classroom. These, videos to watch are on Google Classroom. And it was very overwhelming. It was very difficult for them to navigate with JAWS, to be able to find, they literally just wanted to find, what do I need to do? Where are my instructions? What do I need to accomplish? I really don't need to know when everyone, all of these other students are just posting, discussions. So Google Classroom, though, also flooded their emails. If you ever use Google Classroom, if you don't change your notifications, they're getting an email every time someone is posting or asking a question. So we had to remotely, using Zoom or FaceTime, do a little bit of training on, how do I clean out my inbox? And then what we had to do was work with the teachers to basically develop a way to work around some of these difficulties. So in working with these teachers, what we ended up doing, at least for my upper elementary students, is they would type up a Word document with all of the assignments and meetings that they had for the week. And it literally would say, Monday, you're going to do this. And it would have a link. Here's the video. Tuesday, you're doing this. And it had all of the instructions in one document. And then we would put that into their shared Google Drive. Thankfully, all of the students already had what we call team drives that were shared with their teachers. And we just created a new folder that said virtual learning. And then within that folder, we had a folder that said, week of April 4th. And in that folder, the teachers would put the document with the instructions, any documents that were assignments, any PowerPoints that were instructional, any videos that they had made. Those were all put in that virtual learning file so that the student could literally go to one location and find everything they needed instead of having to navigate through all of Google Classroom. our teachers were fantastic. They even put in folders for like, here's all your DARE information because the 5th graders were doing DARE, or here is information from your specials teachers. So we were able to utilize that kind of workaround. And our students had already been familiarized, obviously, with working with Google Docs. Some of them preferred to use their iPads, synced with a refreshable braille display to access Google Docs. And some of them chose to use their laptops with JAWS. And the ones that were using their laptops, we had already, thankfully, trained them on using something called Google File Stream, which is basically something you can download onto your computer, which then syncs your Google Drive with like your File Explorer on your computer. So when you go to save a document or open a document on your computer, your Google Drive is basically a choice right there along with all your other files. And so they were very easily able to open their computer, go to File Explorer, hit G for Google, hit L for their name or whatever, and then V for virtual learning, and get right into that file. And then what's nice about it is it then opens that Word document in Word. Instead of opening it in Google Docs, it opens it directly into Word, and they were much more familiar with utilizing a document in Word than directly into Google Docs through the internet. And so that worked out beautifully for our students. Now, if this teacher had created the document as a Google Doc, then it will still open as a Google Doc when you go through it through File Explorer. But our teachers had already been working with these students and knew, hey, I need to create these documents as Word documents. And so they were able to do that, which that worked beautifully for reading and writing, those sorts of things. Now, math was kind of a whole different beast. I don't know if you guys are super familiar with working with students with vision impairments, especially when it comes to Braille readers. But math is very difficult to do electronically when it comes to Braille. It just does not translate through a computer. And so the students actually, we dropped off on their doorsteps that section of the book. I had talked with the teachers. I was like, how far do you think you're going to get in this math book? And we figured that out, and I put that math book and those example pages that had been produced with the math book, I put that on their doorsteps. So they had access to those pages. And then what I had to do is work with the teachers and say, listen, I need you to assign straight from this book. If you choose to create something else, we are going to have to physically create that here at home and then somehow get it to them. And once the state had like fully shut down, that meant it had to go through the mail, which would not be a timely turnaround. So thankfully, our teachers were very willing to assign straight from that book so that we could work with the students and say, hey, we're doing practice page 15-2. You have that in your book, and they would be able to utilize that. And then what they had to do was they would actually complete the work on their Perkins Brailler, which is kind of that old school, looks like a typewriter, creates hard copy Braille on paper at home. And then they would open an email and send it to their teacher, and it would be like, I did practice page 15-2, here are my answers. 1, period, 12. And they would list all their answers. Or if it was multiple choice, they would just put 1A, 2C, 3B, and then email that through their email. Now, this was different than what their peers were doing. Their peers were completing these through like a Google form. They would upload a PDF and they would input their answers through Google Forms. And our students just kind of bypassed that whole system and did it this way because this is just what worked for them. Often we did have to get on a Zoom or a Meet and kind of help them with math just because that seemed to be a trickier subject than some of the other ones. So what were the steps that our school district made to make remote learning accessible? Our district was very, very supportive. I'm super thankful for the Francis Howell School District because they supported us really every step of the way. We worked very closely with our teachers, again, encouraging them, hey, utilize the materials that we already have. If we already have this in the curriculum that was purchased, that means it's very easy to get it to the students. If you're going to assign a book, let's make sure it's something that's in Bookshare so that we can very easily access it for all of these students. We also worked with them in transferring material into a more accessible format. Like, hey, instead of it being a Google Sheet, can you download that and save it as a PowerPoint? Our students are more trained on accessing PowerPoint with JAWS than Google Sheets. Normally during the school year, I would have pulled them and done a session on like, hey, let's explore Google Sheets. Let's make sure you know how to do that. We didn't have that luxury during remote learning. So anything we could do to just make it more accessible for each individual student is what we did. The teachers would send us materials. Hey, will you try out this PowerPoint with JAWS? Make sure that everything in is accessible. Absolutely, we will do that. And then we also sent them some websites that had accessible materials on them. Like we had gathered some of the teachers were doing like accessible field trips. So we found some different websites that were accessible, like the Smithsonian. We sent them a website that had a plethora of instructional videos on it that are all audio described and captioned. So if they wanted to assign something, they could search through that instead of just finding something on YouTube that maybe didn't have audio description or didn't have captioning. The school district allowed us, like I said, to create materials at home and then drop these off at houses on their porches with no contact, obviously, with the student until the full shutdown happened from the state. And at that point, we were no longer able to do that. The school district supported us in trying new software, new programs. As a lot of you know, a lot of software companies made things free or reduced price during the shutdown. There was one called Objective Ed that had a whole bunch of games specifically geared to students with vision impairments. Typeo was free for a little while, so we did that. We did a lot of Zoom meetings with our students. We still provided one-on-one instruction just through Zoom. We had weekly Zoom meetings with our special ed departments to troubleshoot, to problem solve, make sure we were all on the same page. We were able to, we all would create individually for each student a list of weekly activities. So if I was normally seeing my student, 4 times a week, I would send home 6 or 7 activities and say, hey, choose 3 or 4 of these to do at home. And they lined up, we tried to line them up, with their goals and what they had been working on in vision instruction. And then we also sent home just additional activities like, hey, we know you're at home. Here are some things you can do. And some of them required some work on our part. Like I created some videos on how to use an oven, how I teach using an oven when you have a vision impairment. And then I sent that to the families because that would have been the next step that we were working on at school. Some of my coworkers created some videos on how to use a pen friend, which is a device, a labeling device for people with vision impairments, or how to use your Victor Trek, which is another piece of technology. So we would send those videos home just as additional activities because we knew, hey, you guys are home, maybe you need things to do. And our district was very supportive, in letting us do all of these things. So as crazy and stressful as remote learning was, our district was very, very supportive. So what were some of the barriers that we faced, specifically with students with vision impairments? The biggest one is that some things like math just require hard copy Braille. And we had to find a way to produce this and get it to the student unless it was something that was already in their books. So like I was working with a kindergartner and we basically were forced to work from the books and materials that had already been produced and given to them. If once the shutdown fully happened, I couldn't just create, a few pages like I normally would at school. Like at school, I could be like, oh, we're going to do this fun activity. I'm just going to create this page of Braille. I no longer could do that. I had to teach from the curriculum that was already produced, which really limited the amount of learning that was happening specifically in those lower elementary grades like kindergarten or first grade. Another big barrier were some of those tech problems. Like if a student had their technology break down, we had no way to get that fixed or replaced. Now, I will say the positive of that was it really challenged some of these students to problem solve and get creative. And I kind of posed it to them like, hey, well, if you were in college and this was your technology, you would have to find a way to still get your work done. Like your professor is not going to just accept, hey, my Braille display is glitching. They're going to expect you to still do your work. So if that means you go old school and do it on your Perkins, then that's what you need to do. But tech problems seem to be a pretty big barrier. And some of our students needed some refreshers in how to use their tech, and that ate up a lot of our instructional time, depending on the student. So that was another barrier. Another barrier we had was with those, especially with those texts, we got lots of calls and emails from our parents. I think we've started to realize that some of our students have gotten really used to having someone there right away to help them navigate a document or figure out a website, and they no longer had that. And so it was a big challenge for them. And I think it was eye-opening for me as an instructor to realize, like, we really need to talk with some of our teachers, and myself included, about making sure we're stepping back. I think sometimes in the classroom, because we're so focused on content, like, well, I just want them to be where the other kids are. I'm going to do this for you. And we need to step back and not do that, because we were getting lots of, at least I was getting lots of emails and calls about like, hey, I can't figure out this document, because they were used to having someone there to help them. Inaccessible websites was a huge barrier. Lots of teachers were not aware about how many websites are just not accessible with a screen reader. Things like IXL or RazKids, or some of these produced curriculum types of websites are not always accessible. And so if they were assigning materials from those, we were required to create or help them create an alternative assignment, because they have the right to the same materials, maybe in a different format. And so that created a huge problem. The other big issue were like video lessons. Some of the teachers were creating video lessons, that were geared towards an entire class, not realizing that they were not being very descriptive with their audio. And so a challenge we issued to them was, hey, make your video, and then I want you to turn your computer around and just listen to it. And can you follow along with this math problem with no visual cues? Because if you cannot, then our students with vision impairments cannot either. And so you need to really practice being very descriptive if you're going to create videos as your lesson. Like if your lesson's not going to be live where a student could ask a question, then you need to make sure that it's very descriptive. And then Zoom meetings. I think Zoom or Google Meets, one of them has like a raise hand feature where you can hit that. Well, our students had trouble navigating to that using a screen reader. But then the teacher would have everybody on their screen and couldn't really see if our student was trying to get their attention by raising hands. And so we just had to work out those glitches as far as with the teachers, like developing a plan. So maybe that student is not muted, but he knows he's not supposed to talk until he's called on, just so that he has a way of getting the teacher's attention without, or a specific cue that they could give to the teacher to say, hey, I need you to call on me and unmute my mic. All right, so what are solutions every teacher can learn from and implement to reduce these barriers? My biggest thing would say be very proactive. We order our Braille books in January and February so that we know we will hopefully have them come August when school starts. And we strongly encourage our teachers to use those materials that are already produced in the provided curriculum. If we have to shut down again in the middle of September, October, November, come this year, if we already have math books in Braille, use the problems in those math books. But to have that, you have to have ordered the math books so that you know that they're there. So again, some of those delays were created because if teachers were using an alternative curriculum or something that they were creating, we were having to create that and then drop it off on a porch. I guess another solution is when you create a document, create it as accessible from the get-go. If you're creating a Word document that you know you're going to use, maybe not just this year, but even years in the future, you know, with various classes, make it accessible from the start. Whether that's a Word document, a PowerPoint, a Google Doc, you know, make sure that those are accessible when you create it the very first time, and then you're not having to worry about going back and changing it and making it accessible. And I know in the future we're going to be doing a training on specifically Google Docs and Word, making those documents accessible. Teach technology. Our students already having those basics in JAWS and using a refreshable Braille display, a computer, an iPad. I can't even imagine how difficult remote learning would have been if they did not already have at least that basic foundation of technology. And so one big thing I've learned from this remote shutdown is we have got to be so proactive with teaching technology when it comes to some of these learners that have differences or, you know, learning in different ways. And also collaborate with your specialist. Your district hopefully has a speech language pathologist, a teacher of the deaf or hard of hearing, a teacher of the visually impaired. You know, those professionals will have great suggestions to help you work with a specific student. And then start creating a list of resources. As a district, we created internally for just our vision department, a document that, you know, all of these resources were flooding in during the shutdown. We had all these great organizations doing virtual learning, APH had stuff going on. And so we just kind of tried to put all of that in one location, even the stuff that we had created ourselves, so that we in the future would have a list of all of these resources that had already been created. And then what resources can I recommend? I think Eileen has a handout with some of those things, but there are some great YouTube videos on creating a Word document that's accessible, creating a PowerPoint that's accessible, how to download and use Google File Stream. That extension on the computers has been really a lifesaver for our students, specifically the ones that prefer to work in Word and not work in Google Docs. I mean, it made remote learning just absolutely accessible. So really quickly, I know we're almost out of time. I'm just going to kind of show you, this is kind of what we sent home initially to our students, was just resources and activities and ideas. Again, remember at the beginning, we had no idea that this was going to last so long. We thought, oh, we're going to be out for like 2 weeks. And so we created as a department, you know, a great list of things to do, and not just core materials like reading and writing, these daily living skills that we're also working on, like making your lunch, cleaning mirrors and windows, using measuring spoons, practice your touch typing, create writing, you know, here's some writing prompts. We had lots and lots and lots of activities so that the parents always had something that they could refer back to, and kind of a reminder of like, here's some of the apps that you already have that you can use, or practice using Zoom text, practice using JAWS. So these were just some of these activities that we sent home.
Laura, this
yes.
This is Eileen. We cannot see anything that you may be sharing. So
really?
Yeah, is there a function in the screen share that you still need to click on?
No. Did you see the PowerPoint?
No, we did not.
Oh my goodness. I've been talking this whole time thinking you're seeing my screen. How bizarre. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
There was a yes button I didn't hit. It was still sharing your screen because I didn't hit yes. There you go.
There it's
now, can you see
now.
it?
It's yes. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I had a whole PowerPoint. Y'all missed it. That's okay. So So these are some lists of activities that we did. Again, I would send it home and say, hey, try to complete 3 out of 5 of these. I would usually put, you know, some sort of, again, there were those really good webinars going on, activities with JAWS. I had, you know, here, write a farewell letter to your 5th grade teachers. And then I had told them, hey, you have to save it. You have to save it in a specific file. You have to email your teacher to tell them that you've done this so they can find it. And so it would be like multiple skills in one activity. This is just a quick example of what the teachers would put together for them. You know, they would put, here are your expectations, here's your Zoom links, here's some optional stuff. And then they would actually break it down. Hey, Monday, there's a Zoom meeting at 9:30. Then you need to read, and here's your ELA. And this would be in that virtual learning folder. This was also obviously all on Google Classroom for all of the rest of the students. This was just a condensed, easier version for our students to get to. So we'll scroll through there. And this is just one of those lists of like accessible websites. Like this, the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History had like accessible field trip stuff. The Library of Congress website had good stuff. NASA, you know, natural parks. We just sent those to the students. And then just lastly, to show you just as an idea, this is kind of what we put together as a department as far as trying to have all of our resources located in one area. So we just created a quick Google Sheets that like abacus videos, all of those Excel webinars were put on YouTube. So we'd put the title and the location. And then I also listed, you know, some of the stuff that was done by our own, if I can find anything, like our own department, FHSDVP. We had created a video on downloading Splashtop. We created a video on using some of these apps. And so now we have this in the future. If we do end up having to go remote, again, we just kind of have some of this in our back pocket to use. So let me go back to here, stop share. So that is what I have. And I don't see I'm not looking at the chat, so I don't know if there were, I think the closed captions were in the chat. So I didn't know if there were specific questions or comments or anything like that.
Yeah, let's see if, feel free, there is room now in the chat if you'd like to put your questions. I'm also gonna try and unmute everybody so that we can also have questions.
And I apologize for not seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, I've given everyone permission to unmute themselves if you would like to ask a question at this time. We'll wait just a little bit longer. Sometimes it takes a bit to unmute.
I see one that says, am I still muted?
Nope, you're on.
No. Okay, I see one that says connecting to audio, but so I don't know if people are if it's like taking a second for people to connect.
Well, I'm not seeing any questions, and if we are having technical problems, you still can feel free to type something in the chat room. Laura, if it's all right with you, I'd like to take back the share screen option.
Sure. Do I have to do something or?
Let's see. Let me see if I can just go ahead and, I think it's switched over. Do you see
Okay.
PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I want to let folks know that this recording will be saved and foldered on our YouTube channel, and it's going to be foldered in the playlist called ICT Accessible Documents. It's located, let's see if I can spotlight it for you. It's located right here in this particular image, but that is the name of it. And make sure that you hit subscribe if you haven't joined our YouTube yet with that option. It'll give you notifications when new things come up. We have several types of videos that we've been working on that are DIY types of examples. Laura Hoffman with our ETC program has put in a lot of educational and AT specific videos that are really informative. So it's a great resource to subscribe to if you haven't already done that. Let's see. And wanted to share with you our upcoming videos. We have, and the series that we'll be doing, the next one Laura and I will be doing together is part 2 of today's session. It's going to be making classroom materials accessible. So we'll cover some basic things from print accessibility, math material accessibility, and Google Docs, how to create those from the beginning so that they're accessible. We will have another session that's a demonstration on creating an accessible Word document. We also have a separate one on making or using the Word accessibility checker that's available in newer versions of Word. We have other sessions that will cover AT users and a panel talking about using assistive technology for like screen readers and Braille devices, how they navigate and the problems they come across. We also have an individual that will be recently certified in the free NVDA screen reader. We'll be offering a demonstration that will teach skills on how to use that screen reader so that you can test your website. And then we'll wrap up probably the end of the year with making accessible social media posts, and that's going to be focused on Facebook and Twitter. But we are open, since this is a new series we're starting, if you have an area of expertise in accessibility that you would like to lead a session or a demonstration or would like to recommend someone, feel free to have them reach out, give me a call or email me. That information is there. We would be happy to connect with you. So I'm gonna, do you see any other, anything in the chat box, Laura, that we can
Someone asked if we could share the accessible field trip list, and I know you said you have everyone's emails.
Yes.
Because of the registration, and that's an easy document we can just send out.
Yes, absolutely. I have everyone's email that registered for the session, and so we will be sending that resource that Laura will provide, and also the handout put together from today's session. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Then that concludes our session today of Let's Talk ICT.